Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Folkestone and Hythe District and Parish Councils Joint Committee. Please note this meeting is being streamed live to the internet. Please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking to reduce any background noise. So with that being said, we will move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of a chair. So the chair alternates between a district councillor and a parish/town councillor every meeting. And for this meeting, it's for a district councillor to be appointed as chair. So do we have any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Prater to chair the meeting.
Okay. And do we have a seconder?
I second that.
Yeah, 2 seconders.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I have a show of hands, all those for appointing Prater, Councillor Prater? Thank you. So that looks like it is unanimous. So Councillor Prater, you are appointed as chair.
I'm very grateful. Thank you. Grateful and somewhat surprised as the late entrant to the meeting. Thank you for that. Jake's done all the hard introduction work of reading the notice about live streaming, so we will move directly on. Jake, do we have any apologies of absence?
So thank you, Chair. So we have 4 apologies. Councillor Blakemore, Councillor Allison, Councillor Beals, but we have Councillor Bohr substituting, and Councillor Joyce, who we have Councillor Hayward as substituting, who's not in attendance, checking actually, so no, just those.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you for all those attending, and thank you to the person substituting as well. Enjoy. Welcome to the meeting. Enjoy. We will then go for declarations of interest. I'd suspect not, given the agenda, but has anyone got any declarations of interest in any items on this agenda? Yeah, it's that general shake of the head, so I'm going to take that as a no, Jake. Minutes of the last meeting this is the meeting of the 27th of July, and the minutes are a part of the pack. Are we happy to accept those as an accurate record? Could I have a proposer if somebody's happy to do so?
Propose accept.
Proposed from Frank, and to a seconder.
I'll second that.
Paul or Mike, pull one out of that, Jake. All those in favour, please show. I think that was everybody who was at it. Anybody abstaining? That's Kirsten abstaining, and any against? No, I think that's everyone has voted, Jake. Okay, that's fine. In that case, we swiftly go to the main item of business, which is from Paul Butler, who's the Democratic Services Lead Specialist, and will be giving us a presentation, leading us through a presentation on the May town and parish elections, which, having been elected 3 times in them, I thought will run excellently. And we'll see.
Thanks a lot. Right, so I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a couple of slides here. Hopefully you will be able to see them. Can I just have a thumbs up from someone if you can see that? Great, thank you very much. Okay, right, so my name's Paul Butler. I am the Democratic Services and Lead Specialist for Elections and Electoral Registration. And thank you very much for listening to me this evening. I hope you don't get too bored of my statistics and reflections. So first of all, I'm just going to go through some stats of the parish elections this year, and then I'll lead into some reflections of what I thought went well, what I thought was challenging, and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's see if this will work for me. So here's the first set of slides for some statistics for the parish council electorate. Just shy of 84,000 this year in May across 39 potential parish council elections. We had 219 candidates stand, which equated to 15 contested elections and 24 uncontested elections. And the average turnout across the parish elections was 34.4%. with the highest turnout in Harvey West of Folkestone Town Council and the lowest for East Folkestone of Folkestone Town Council as well. This year, new for 2023, was the introduction and implementation of voter ID and accessibility. So on the left-hand side screen, you can see there just under the header voter ID, there was some measures put in place. So there was a national advertising and promotion from the Electoral Commission and media outlets. We did a lot of local comms, even down to a manual leaflet drop. Thank you, Jake, for doing that with Alex this year. We had greeters at polling stations, prompting people to get their ID ready. There was a new version of the poll card, so it's slightly bigger, and that instructed people to bring their ID, and on the back of it, there was the list of acceptable photo ID. And there was signage in the polling station itself, which kind of mimicked what was on the back of the poll card, just to say, this is what you can show, this is what will be accepted. In addition to that, if you couldn't provide the required ID, you could apply for a voter authority certificate, which I call a VAC because voter authority certificate is quite hard to say. So that's highlighted in purple because if anyone wants to scan that QR code with the dinosaur in on the left-hand side, that will take you to a website where you can apply for a voter authority certificate. In addition, at the polling station, the teams there had some additional paperwork to fill in. A BPRL, which was a ballot paper refusal list, and that in large concerned where people were refused a ballot paper based on the fact that they couldn't provide the required photo ID. And then the VIDF, which is the voter identification evaluation form, and that was around the types of ID being shown. So if it was an ID that was on the list that was shown, it wasn't noted on the evaluation form. But if it was a voter authority certificate or an anonymous elector document, then it was noted on that form throughout the day. In addition to that, we had the accessibility changes and improvements for 2023. So magnifiers, tactile voting devices, ramps at stations, large print ballot papers and disabled polling booths were already in place before the accessibility requirements came in. However, we introduced locally pencil grips, audio ballot papers. So what the audio ballot paper was, it was online, but everyone could have accessed it from a QR code or web address within the polling station on their mobile phone. And what that would have done is read out the ballot paper verbatim as to what was appearing on paper in front of you. And then the person could have the tactile voting device atop of the ballot paper, and it would correspond, and you could lift the braille flap to mark where you needed to mark on that ballot paper against your choice. So it allowed people to vote independently by themselves if they wanted to. So phones were obviously allowed at stations, and it's in the requirements now that people are allowed them because they have smart tech on them where it can read websites and PDF documents. In addition to that, locally highlighted in purple, because again, if you want to scan the QR code, you can go on our website and read a bit more about it. It's the polling station companion, which is essentially a letter for those that may have a cognitive impairment or aren't confident in going to the polling station. They could apply for one of these companion letters, which they could give to the polling station staff along with their ID, and then the polling station staff will come into action and support that person through the process of being able to cast their vote and then putting it in the ballot box securely. Okay, so there was a lot of processes this year. In the top left-hand corner with regards to the timetable, we had 5 candidate and agent events over the course of the timetable, 12 days of nominations where we're accepting the nomination papers of candidates standing between 10 AM and 4 PM. We had 7 notice deadlines, so the notice of election, statement of persons nominated, etc., etc. 7 registrations, so electoral registration deadlines, so the normal registration, postal vote deadline, proxy deadline, etc. And then 7 data deadlines, and that was pertaining to our printers. So we work with a print company based in London, and we had a polling plan with them. So like a service level agreement and action plan. It contained 11 extracts, so electoral data with regards to poll cards, postal packs, proxies, and among those extracts, we obviously had returned back to us 8 sets of proofs to go through. So it's a lot of different elections to go through there. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. So the printers delivered 5 lots of literature across the district and to us. So that was poll cards in bulk and to addresses through Royal Mail, postal packs and ballot papers to our civic centre, so we could do a final check and then put them in the ballot boxes ready for poll. And among the timetable itself, there was countless comms going back and forth via email, via phone, etc. Just below that, we've got Royal Mail. So we had 2 polling plans with Royal Mail, just to discuss and outline how many potential poll cards were going out, postal packs, how many we expect returned. And for Parish in particular, we had 39 licences across the parish councils and 39 different postcodes. Excuse me. Our next slide is concerning staffing and stations for this year. So we had 444 different staff roles at this selection, 319 members of staff in total, 5 members of the core team. Jake was one of those. Myself and my colleague Alan were both appointed as deputy returning officers in case we needed to step in if Susan as returning officer was incapacitated. And over the timetable, we had 21 different training sessions that we obviously had to, build PowerPoint presentations for, detail handouts, appointment sheets, all of that good stuff. And then with regards to stations, we have 53 polling places, so particular venues and buildings, and within them we've got 58 polling stations where people cast their vote, and that equated to 870 hours of poll in total. Now, at the end of this presentation, if anyone would like to guess those entrances of polling stations, I will take some guesses, but you can only win my admiration. There's nothing else, unfortunately. So yeah, keep those pictures in mind. So obviously when polling day finishes, we've got the verification and count. That took place at the Three Hills Sports Park, which is done. It's been done there for quite a few years now. Works really well. That was the layout this year, with the green lines being the power leads to the different supervisor tables. Just in case you were wondering what they were. We had 120 counters plus supervisors, security, runners, all coming together to do this verification and count of all of these different areas. We started at 9 o'clock and we finished, thankfully, at 5 p.m. in the evening. Order of events was district and parish verification first, so the counting of pieces of paper back from polling stations and the postal vote opening sessions. And then we continued directly afterwards with district counts, had a break, and then continued again for parish counts. So that's my statistics over with. A couple of reflections from this year's elections. So the district and parish elections are a lot of work for the team and myself in comparison to any other election like a parliamentary. A parliamentary has 1 ballot paper and around about 6 or 7 candidates, but this one, it's flipped on its head. There's 219 candidates at parish alone, various different proof checking that you have to do across the different elections that are taking place. The difference is that a parliamentary election will have a massive turnout and a lot of awareness, but historically district and parish elections have a lower turnout. This year we have mostly positive feedback as well, which is always welcomed. So around voter ID and accessibility, I thought that the launch of it went relatively smooth. We found that a lot of people knew about it when they got to the polling station. And with regards to the BPRL, the refusal list, only 35 across all stations were turned away, and 31 of the 35 returned with the correct photo ID. So not too bad at all on an implementation of something on the first occasion, I thought. Accessibility changes were welcomed across the board, and although we did quite a lot, and I think more than other authorities, I think we can do a lot more in future. And now that we've got the kind of basics embedded, I think we can improve and grow on that. With regards to processes, the statutory timetable for district and parish elections, we know far in advance that what's going to happen and when the deadlines are. So it does give us help in planning. However, this year, the King's coronation put a bit of a spanner in the works with an extra bank holiday with regards to staffing. And I'll go into that shortly. So what we did across the timetable, as previously mentioned, we did various events to engage and allow prospective candidates the chance to gain a better understanding of the roles and the candidacy. And in turn, it helped us with regards to nomination papers, because that better understanding allows that person to fill in the paperwork a lot better. And nominations had minimal fuss. Everyone behaved themselves, which was great. There was a lot to process, but I think the core team and the team that we had processing the nomination papers did really well in short space turnaround times. We had multiple notices within the processes, 123 notices that had to be proof checked with all the candidate information, polling station information, 70 of them alone with the parishes. So we check for typos, incorrect dates, all of that takes time. Registration deadlines, they just cause a peak in activity across the timetable, but we work late to accommodate for that. We start early just so we can manage those peak times. With regards to printers, excuse me, I'll just take another drink. Our work with the printers started late February and went all the way through to polling day. Like I say, this set of elections are the most complex, with a lot of data going back and forth, a lot of extracts being sent back and forth from our printers, all securely through our SharePoint system. A lot of proof checking, like I've already said. What we have to do with printers is work for everything being contested, and then it's scaled back if it's not, rather than the other way around, and there's like a blind panic to try and work out what we need to do for those that contest it. So we do the 39 elections across the parishes, work as if they're contested. Then when we find out that they're not, it's scaled back to only this year, the 15 that were contested, and they go through to poll. We check the delivery of materials, both in London and at the Civic Centre. So the Civic Centre is the ballot papers, but we go up to London to check the printed postal packs as well before they go out. And yeah, just a lot of emails back and forth with my manager at the printers there. But in all, worked really well. With Royal Mail, their processes are quite rigid. They are short on resource, as every other printers and other suppliers that we use, short in resource, and they work with what they've got. The reason why we have a separate license and postcode with them, and there's an inherent cost with it, but that cost is less than person resource, what we would need to do if we were sorting out postal packs by hand. What the license and the postcode does for us is highlight the different areas that are coming back. They can be pre-sorted by Royal Mail, and it helps for postal vote opening sessions. We just have to do a double check. Oh, what have I done there? Sorry about that. So with regards to the last point of Royal Mail, I think the sending of postal packs separately this year, so district postal packs and parish postal packs, worked really well. It was easier to manage coming back into postal vote opening sessions, and the turnout was relatively the same as district. So that means that people weren't throwing away the parish thinking that they'd already voted and things like that. The turnout figures were more or less the same. Obviously, we can't account for people that may not wish to vote at parish, but like I say, if the turnout figures were very, very low, we would have obviously, it would have rung alarm bells for that process, but it didn't. So that was great. Staffing and stations. So voter ID, for staffing, it turned a lot of people away from working this year. And I think it was the fear of the unknown. A lot of people have been doing polling station duties for a long time, and they just said, I don't want the extra responsibility for that, for turning away someone that didn't have the required ID, which was fair enough, entitled to their own opinion. And if they didn't want to work, then, you know, unfortunately that was quite abundant across those that had worked for many years. Crux, as a reaction to that, it was a struggle to fill some of the polling positions, but we did have central funding, which allowed us to increase the payment to the presiding officers, which did help recruit at a later date. And there was 2 sets of training for the presiding officers as well. We procured training through the Association of Electoral Administrators, but we also did one internally, which required them to come in, so we could re-emphasise the fact that voter ID was coming. We could give them their official appointment letters, the Electoral Commission handouts, etc. With regards to postal and count recruitment, this was unaffected. It was just on a larger scale than normal. So we had to, so in 2021, we only had 60 counters, mainly because of COVID and social distancing. But obviously this year it was 120. It was double the amount that we required. Dropouts occurred frequently, and we think that it was the additional bank holiday that didn't help recruit, because people saw that as an extra day off if they wanted to book leave, and then they get that extra day in amongst that leave that they're booking off, and people just didn't want to work because it was a nice long weekend, and who could blame them, really. The core team this year, I think, was very strong. We dealt with everything that was thrown our way, and we got to the result that we wanted. A lot of time and resource was spent preparing slides for the staff training, with regards to the information and handouts, not to mention the several hours actually carrying out the training as well. There was no major issues reported at stations this year, which was great. Although we had a couple of stations change because of their availability. I think some had weddings that they obviously had booked far in advance. So, you know, that was one of the reasons why we had to change that one. I think that was down in Brooklyn, that one. We are finding it hard to secure suitable venues. Since the pandemic, there are a lot of venues that are deciding not to become polling stations because they're seeking out more frequent rentals, and, you know, who could blame them? They want the income. We come along every now and again saying that we want a polling station. They're obviously going to go for the one that they get an income for every week. Rural areas as well are the worst hit for getting suitable replacements for polling stations as well, for obvious reasons. There's not as much infrastructure in rural areas. So for the verification and count, it was an early start the next day. Verifying kicked off at 9 AM, like I said, and the last ward was Folkestone ward, and that finished at about 5 PM. I think the counters and supervisors did quite well, considering the complexity of the different elections. And we have to keep in mind that, you know, the supervisors, they don't do this every day. They're not part of my core team. They are various managers and team leaders from throughout the council that we train up, and, you know, they're appointed for that purpose, and then they go back to their day job after all is done. We had a new count system for the count, and I think that worked well, but it did slow the process slightly because I wanted to do some additional checking just to make sure that the system was doing what it was supposed to do. But I think from the verification, the feedback from the day was in large very positive. So the last point on reflections is recharges. I thought I would mention this because it does come up every year, and someone's always mentioning it to me as well. But so the Kent scale of fees for parish recharge is used across Kent. It's adopted by council every year. And just as a quick note, that the central claims unit for parliamentary elections, police crime commissioner elections, where we claim back the fees for elections, they are changing how they fund elections in the future, and will be using hourly rate bandings. So it's anticipated that the Kent scale of fees that we use for parish recharges will be changed as well to reflect that. And it will be hourly rate bandings going forward. When that will be, I'm not quite sure, but it will have to go through Kent Chiefs and then subsequently through full council. So the reason why parish councils are recharged for their own elections and by-elections is because it was decided at full council in 2016 that this method would be adopted, and it was thought to be thought to be fairer on both parish councils and the taxpayer. As for example, if Dymchurch Parish Council had a by-election, it is unfair to expect Hawkinge Parish to pay for it, and vice versa. So I believe, since being in post, that most by-elections have gone down in the marsh, contested down in the marsh, and whereas rural areas tend to go uncalled or uncontested. And just last point from me, just with regards to the recharges and the fact that it is a maximum recharge. So we will obviously look for value for money and cost savings where we can, but not so much as to risk the integrity of the election, because the returning officer and deputies all have a duty to ensure that elections are carried out successfully and efficiently. So that's me. That's where I've got to my last slide, just saying thank you for listening. I hope that wasn't too much information and didn't get too bored. And throwing it back to you guys, really, if there's anything that you think we could have done differently, if we should have done more comms to you, or were they sufficient and timely, what worked well, what could be improved. And then just a final note from me to say that the polling district and station review will be commencing on the 2nd of October. Various information will be on our website. There'll be notices sent around to parishes to invite people up until the 17th of November to comment on our current portfolio of polling stations, the way the polling districts are laid out. If anyone was watching the Audit and Governance committee meeting last night, I did a short presentation on that, and it's just around polling districts. So we cannot change the setup or makeup of any parish council, any parish ward, district ward, county division. They are changed by local boundary commission. So this review that's taken place on the October the 2nd up until the 17th of November, it's regarding any polling district that's not coterminous with a parish council, so an administrative line that we can possibly change to help balance electorates. If that can't be done, then unfortunately they have to stay in place until the local boundary commission start their own review. But we welcome comments around polling districts, and we welcome comments on the polling stations, the current polling stations, and also the proposals that will be put forward by way of the acting returning officer statement and proposal letter that will be published on the 2nd of October as well. So thank you for listening. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much for that, Paul, and also thank you and the team for everything that you did. Well, I was going to say in the run up to May, but it's the run it's on the days itself, and obviously afterwards as well. Certainly very grateful for what it does. As you say, it's a once every 4-year job. Suddenly your job becomes really, really difficult, as opposed to just being generally difficult, and we're very grateful for the work that was put in. I'm very happy to take comments at this stage. I can see a hand from Paul, so over to you, and then Frank.
Thank you very much, Tim. I just wanted to echo what Tim said, really, in terms of certainly my interfacing with the team. I thought the team were very professional. I thought they were really, really good to deal with, and I think, as we've seen, the process that you used and things you did were over and above that was what was required, and I think that was shown in the way that the election process went, and the way that the postings and other things went. So I want to thank you and your team for that. I've just got a couple of questions, just in terms of incidents to polling stations. Were there any recordable incidents of polling stations that were initiated by the change this time, where people had to bring their voter ID with them, Paul?
Thank you, Councillor. There were a couple of instances, disgruntled people, but that's as far as it went. We only had cause for concern at one polling station where a polling station inspector had to attend and just kind of provide backup for the presiding officer, and that was the only instance that was reported to me. Everyone else, I think, they understood that it was a requirement that the polling station staff and us in particular hadn't set. So it was kind of like, don't shoot the messenger. That's the kind of vibe that we were trying to get across. And I think I can't say it was welcomed, because a lot of people did disagree with it, but it was accepted. Now, the difference being is that was district and parish elections, where the turnout is lower than a parliamentary. It could be a totally different kettle of fish for parliamentary, and we could have a lot more turnout. So we probably go from 35-37% up into 60%. It depends what's going on in the media. So that will bring a lot more people out that potentially had no knowledge, didn't read their poll card, didn't care about the media at the time because they just thought they weren't going to vote. Whereas for the parliamentary, one would assume that the Electoral Commission will restart their media campaigns with voter ID, because this will be the first one where it does involve that. So I'm hoping that if the same promotion, planning, etc. applies to a parliamentary that it did in district and parish, I think it will be quite good, and it will lessen any instances or kind of abuse, maybe verbal abuse towards polling station staff at the parliamentary coming forward. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive response, because my rider to that was going to be, so what's the learning going forward? And I think you've already dealt with that. So thank you very much, Paul. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Frank.
Thank you, Tim. Two questions. On the next general election, well, some of us are going to be in a different constituency. Are you still running those parishes that are now going to be with Ashford, or is Ashford going to be running our part of the election?
Very good question, thank you. So yes, North Down East and North Down West district wards will form part of the Ashford County constituency from the 1st of November for the next UK general election. Now, the reason why I'm saying that quite articulate is because from the 1st of November, if there were a parliamentary by-election called before the next general election, it reverts back to the original boundary lines and constituencies that we had prior. It's only at the next UK general election that the North Downs East and North Down West will go to the Ashford County constituency. Now, at that point, we've already had conceptual meetings with Ashford, because what we will do is manage those polling stations like we always have done. And in theory, the only change that will apply is that they will have a different ballot paper to the rest of our district. So they will have an Ashford County constituency ballot paper. You are voting for a member of the Ashford County constituency for in the North Downs East and North Downs West areas. But for the rest of our district, they will have a Folkestone and Hythe county constituency ballot paper. And that's really the only difference. It sounds so simple, but that's the only difference that will apply to us. We will still manage the polling stations. We will still issue the ballot papers. We will still issue the postal packs on behalf of the acting returning officer for Ashford, because we know the polling stations, we know the staff, we know the areas, so it makes sense to do that. And then what will happen at the close of poll is we will hand over those ballot boxes to Ashford, and they will have their full quota to be able to verify that and count. The interesting thing is whether well, when is this general election going to happen? You know, is it going to happen in March? Is it going to happen in May? Is it going to happen this year? I hope not. Is it going to happen in November next year? I mean, it would be quite interesting if they do combine it with the Police Crime Commissioner next year, because that will bring an added complexity of, you know, where the ballot boxes go and how the verification is done. Because the verification part of that is, yes, it's counting the pieces of paper back from polling stations, but it's also rectifying issues where electors may have put them in the wrong box. So if you think about that, if it was a standalone general election, the ballot boxes can be part verified with the ballot paper account, and then they can whisk up to Ashford Borough Council to then be verified. Whereas if you've got the Police Crime Commissioner ballot boxes that also need to be verified, they're Folkestone and Hythe. So what happens if you have a parliamentary ballot paper for the Ashford County constituency in a Folkestone and Hythe Police Crime Commissioner ballot box? So there's these extra processes that we would need to think about if it was combined. You know, how do we get that up there securely? What's the due diligence behind that? All of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping, my preference is that the parliamentary general election will be in October, November 24, because it allows us to get the implementation of a lot of the Elections Act 2022 out of the way. It gets the Police Crime Commission out of the way, which allows for another voter ID to be embedded, and then we've got the summer to plan for it, depending on when they announce it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yes, that's that one. The other one reflects a bit on the fact that there were a definite shortage of candidates among the various parish councils. Yes, there were about 16, and you said about 16 elections, but many of them were Folkestone and Hythe town wards. There were very few elections within the rural parts of the district. And numbers coming forward in one case were absolutely zero. I was looking in terms of the times when people can take their nomination papers in. It's not easy for people who are working to take them in because of the hours they're done. Yes, all right, you can give them to somebody else to take in, but I took mine in and I had mine wrong. And the problem is, if you've got them wrong, you take them in at the last minute, you then can't get them changed in time to be nominated properly.
Sure. So
other times statutory. That's basically.
Yeah. So the nomination deadline is statutory of day minus 19, so yeah, 19 days before poll. But you can extend the nomination period. So, by law, we would only have had to have done seven days of nominations, but we extended it to 12, to allow extra time for people. Plus, because we knew that there were going to be a lot of applicants this year, it helped spread it out a little bit. We also did an appointment system as well for election agents that we knew were going to have a lot to bring in, and so we managed that quite well in regards to having the correct resource in when we knew that they were going to arrive. But yeah, it's the ye old legislation as well, unfortunately, with regard to election timetables. It's very rigid. And we can only do what we can in that time frame. But I totally agree with what you're saying. The nomination paper, I think, could be clearer in respect of what it's asking for. And we did a session on nomination papers, and there was some handouts for that on our website in the lead up to the poll, and I think that did help. I think it reduced the amount of people having to go away and redo their papers and then return. But unfortunately as well, it's one of these things where independent candidates at parishes, they don't have the backing of a political party. So they are in large researching what they need to do by themselves. So it's one of those things where we try and help as much as possible but we are there to facilitate the election. The onus is on the candidate to get their declarations done properly and within the legal confines. But we're always there to help them try and get that validation of their nomination paper and things, and we point them in the direction of what they need to do. But yeah, unfortunately, unless the legislation changes to allow people to, email them in or submit them by way of like an online portal or something, becoming really 21st century. I don't see anything changing in the near future. And with regards to the Elections Act and all of that coming in, that's adding further complexities about registration alone, let alone things to do with the election timetable and candidates. So I dread to think what will come in the future when they plan to change things for elections. Hopefully it will go our way, but unfortunately I can't guarantee that.
I'm going to say the staff were very good. My mistake was because I qualified as a candidate by more than one of the, in fact, I qualified by all four of the categories you had to have. I just put as above, put the address of the first one, and then just put as above, as above, as above. That wasn't accepted, but the staff there changed it, or let me change it while I was there. So it didn't end up as a problem, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's a common misconception because when the way the criteria works with the A, B, C, and D, you could fulfill that criteria in different ways. So it might not necessarily be your home address that you fulfill the criteria on. It could be that you have a business, so then it would be a different address, and that's why the nomination paper needs to be in full. So it's quite blatant in how you. So if it was pulled across, in court in front of a judge, they can see quite matter of fact that you fulfill the criteria because of X, Y, and Z. So yeah, those sorts of things, again, you're not to know unless you do it day in, day out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Frank. Mike.
Yeah, I thought the election went very well. We had the luxury of having a KCC by-election about a month before this election, so everybody was well informed, because obviously that election you didn't need the ID, but
No, very true.
The officials used that opportunity to educate people, because basically, as I'm sure you find, it's the same sort of 30% that voted all these secondary, if I can call it that way, elections. So everybody was prepped up for the next event. Really, my question concerns the next round of elections in 4 years' time, because we all assume by then that Otterpool will be starting to be habitated. And obviously, currently there are 5 parishes that will be part of that occupation process. So I assume at the moment, whatever the postcodes don't exist at the moment, but I assume in the short term, over the next 4 years, perhaps there might be 1,000 houses built, and there could easily be a position where there's 200 in each of the parishes. So will those postcodes be put in the parish? Is the stand at the moment? From what I understand it, in the medium term, Otterpool will probably be its own entity as far as voting is concerned. So it's just whether you really started the forward planning for that event. And obviously, again, it will affect the parishes because the numbers will reflect on our precepts, won't it, and things like that. So it's quite important to us how these new properties are going to be allocated in the medium term, except in the long term, they might be their own entity.
Yeah, exactly that. Thanks for that question. Yes, so I have done a bit of digging, a bit of kind of scenario planning for Otterpool Park, but it's very, very high level at the moment. But yeah, I totally agree. The electorate size has the potential to increase exponentially over the next couple of years. Obviously, it's a 20 to 30 year project, so when it becomes peak, then that's probably when we need to start looking at community identity in respect of elections and things like that. I'm not saying that in 20 to 30 years it will happen then. It could happen sooner. We've got things to contend with, so the local boundary commission. they're fully aware of what's going on in this area, so they could come with a review saying that they propose, this for this area. They want to change the makeup of district wards to reflect the electorate balance, which really could happen. But I'm not saying now. I think this is in a few years' time. But other than that, there could also be a community governance review triggered as well, which is triggered by the local authority, and that will concern all of the parishes involved. It could be, I think what happened is before my time, but it's a bit like Hawkinge on a smaller scale. So Hawkinge was obviously a parish. It was very small, and then that grew very, very quickly over quite a large distance. So then that Hawkinge Town Council identity occurred. It was split into 3 wards over time as well. So if you think about that scenario and then put that in the area of Otterpool, that geographical area, that's the potential of how it's gonna pan out, I think. Just for community identity, balancing of electorate, and going that way. But it's a few years in the making. That is, it's not within the next 5 years, I don't think. Don't quote me on that. But I don't think it's any time soon. And there are, like I say, there are external forces at play there with the local boundary commission. They could swoop in and say it needs to be this. We want it to be this. What do you think? But that will go through council. That will go through consultation. It won't just happen. It'll be representations requested from everyone, like yourselves, like the electors, everyone that has an invested interest in what's going to take place. I hope that answers.
I know what the build priorities are, and I suspect Stanford will suddenly treble in electorate, perhaps in the next 4 years. So I think that's where the main issue will arise.
Yeah. So with regards to Stanford, it's very small at the moment, and as a polling district, so Stanford is its own polling district as well. So at the moment, it's very low in electorate, and it has the potential to obviously grow with the plan of permission that's in place. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the electorate is going to outgrow the requirement of a polling district. So the Electoral Commission guidance states that within a polling district, it should be a maximum of 2,500 electors that go to a polling station.
Right.
So yeah, it's that's eligible electors that go to a polling station, but it could be up to 3,100 if you take the 20% of postal voters off. So yeah, it's quite a big increase that you can allow to happen in one polling district alone. But it's about that community identity. At what point does it stop becoming Stanford and start becoming Otterpool Park? And whereabouts in the geographical location is that catchment area that people start recognising themselves as Otterpool Park instead of Stanford? It's a difficult one, and it's very contentious, very subjective.
Same what happened at the selling den as well, wasn't it? That's early on as well, right? It's close to parts of Selling village itself.
Yeah, so it has the potential for communities to say, actually, I'm Sellinge, I don't identify as Otterpool, whereas new builds and people moving into the area, that's all they know, isn't it? That's all they know as being Otterpool. So organically it could happen, just with who's moving in and the geographical catchment area.
Well, you better brace yourself because it's coming at you.
Yeah, that's when I'm winning the lottery in a couple of years. So
Don't blame them.
You're behind me on that one, Paul. I'd also like to say that I think in 3.5 years' time, I would be surprised if we had another 2,000 electors in the Otterpool area by then, but we'll see. I think that would be a stretch target at this moment. As there aren't any more hands up at this moment, I've got a couple of points I'll comment. So firstly, a few related supplementaries actually on Frank's. Just for my own curiosity, Paul, you mentioned about the Ashford constituency split, and I see the logic of you managing that. Does that include through to you doing the postal vote opening and verification, or through to polling day for those wards, or would you be passing those off to Ashford?
No, so we're going to do everything as if it was ours, to be honest with you. So yeah, we'll do the opening sessions, but it'll be separate to Folkestone and Hythe. So whether that's in a different room, whether it's at a different time, all to play for on that. But yeah, totally.
That's grand. Second related supplementary on Frank's other question. I totally get your point on deadlines of acceptance of nominations and things like that. But a point which I didn't know if you answered with that, would there be a possibility potentially of having one evening session for acceptance of ballot papers, maybe, even if that was agreed by appointment or something, so that the point that was made about people who couldn't do it between 9 and 5, if there was one session that was between 5 and 7 or something like that, would that give some flexibility?
What I can do, I can take that back, because I would need to check regulations, because I don't know whether the 10 till 4 is a stipulation, but I think it can be extended, but I don't know whether it can be extended the whole period or for one particular occasion. The kind of caveat of that is a bottleneck, isn't it, where everyone could turn up after work and we're there for hours and hours and hours. So it could be in our best interest to say actually 10 till 5 or something like that the whole way.
I get the point on that, but it is just the flexibility. As I said, it might be possible just to do it by appointment only or something. If you're going to come to this session, you have to book for it. You have to email me and tell me you're coming in advance or something along those lines. But if there wasn't, certainly on my reading of the legislation, I haven't seen any reason why you couldn't. But on the other hand, I've also never seen anyone else do it. It would be Folkestone and Hythe cutting edge, which I know you like. So yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, leave that with me, and I will investigate, and obviously pass it to the returning officer as well, because Susan is the person that will decide. But I can, recommend and go through the legislation to make sure we're playing by the book.
Absolutely. I think that's genuinely 3.5 years away, because I don't think it would apply particularly as much to the other elections in the run through. There are so many fewer candidates in those that it's less of an issue probably.
Yeah,
I can see Frank's hand up, but I will do just one more. I had a few questions, so I'll do a couple more of them and then hand it to Frank. Where it was mentioned about the number of candidates being low for some of those town and parish council elections, take that point. But I thought a number of your training sessions that were done and the slides that done on how to stand and how to put your papers in were excellent. They did feel a little bit district focused though, rather than necessarily town and parish.
Yeah.
And I did wonder if there's an opportunity for a quite specific how to stand in town and parish elections pack to be made available to clerks months in advance of the election, so they could use those as the basis of training session, as basis of information sessions which they could run in their areas and work through slides, things like that. Even put them online on websites and things like that to encourage people to consider the process that haven't done so before. And actually, it would be really good if that was a single centrally produced piece of material, which was then given to people, which I'm sure they can then adapt and they can talk to and round. But if they've got the core of that centrally, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Something I will take forward to the next time. Thank you very much for that. And I think these things, they just go hand in hand with helping streamline and make the process a lot more smoother. Because not as many people get frustrated in having to return their paperwork and things like that. So, and it builds confidence in the process, and then in turn, word of mouth, you might get more people stand, mightn't you?
If you've got that as well, I know the Electoral Commission have some "why don't you stand" type of materials as well. It might be that one could create sort of a dual pack or 2 packs there. So there's a "why don't you," or what does a town and parish councillor do, and how you become one, or how you stand to be one. That might even be 2 different packs different things, which fulfill two slightly different roles, but I think both would be valuable, and the less uncontested elections we have, the better.
Yeah,
all of us.
thank you. I'll take that
Terrific.
forward.
Thank you for that. Frank, you've got your hand up, so I shall.
I have. Anybody else wants to say anything? We've got the wanted to just go on to the hairy subject of by-elections. As you know, in the last election, there was a candidate stood and was elected for one town and one parish council, who subsequently, within weeks, really, of being elected, was sent to prison, which presumably will trigger a by-election in both of those, probably, bearing in mind where they are, which obviously brings in much more cost for those particular councils. And it is the cost of by-elections that are, how can I put it, make it difficult for some of the parishes. If we do happen to have one, we were lucky, we were one short on the day of the election. We advertised, we got 3 candidates. 2 of the 3 dropped out before we were due to have a co-option session, because nobody wanted that election within the parish. The problem is, of course, that it's a ridiculously low number of people that have to sign a petition to call a by-election. And if anybody's got a thorny subject that happens to be going at the same time, that's when the problem really does come. You have a small parish could be made bankrupt by the cost of a by-election.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the if an election's, and just with regards to the resignation of that councillor, there have been, so it was New Romney Coast Ward and Dymchurch Parish Council that had the vacancies triggered. Both were called, so we both had the required amount of petitioners to call the election to fill the vacancy. We had 1 person stand for New Romney Coast, that went uncontested, but Dymchurch has had 3 candidates, and that's going to poll. And I quite agree with what you're saying. The cost of a by-election, the cost everywhere has gone up, hasn't it? And it's no different for the cost of paper, the cost of printing, and things like that. So yeah, I sympathise with you, but unfortunately, if someone calls the 10 petitioners, that's set in law, so we can't change anything locally on that, unfortunately. But yeah, if that happens, then it has to run its course legally, and I would assume that if there was a small parish, that the district council would have to foot the bill and then recharge over several months or something like that, because like I say, it has to happen legally, it has to happen. So yeah, we're bound by that legislation, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately, the way you look at it, it's fortunate because the electorate are getting what they want, and because they've called the election, but it's unfortunate because, like you say, parishes could go bankrupt because of it. And like I said in my presentation, the rural areas, thankfully, touch wood as well, don't get called very often. It seems to be down on the marsh that they get called a lot, and they seem to get the resignations a lot. And so unfortunately, they inherently have a lot more contested by-elections that go the whole way. It's very rare that we get a vacancy in the marsh area that goes uncontested or is not called. So I start looking at my timetables whenever I get a vacancy in the area. I start looking at my timetables in preparation, because I know that petition's going to come.
Yeah, it is really a bit. It's a thing. I know it's in the law. Calc has lobbied now about the few number of people that are needed to call a by-election.
I wonder if there's something.
Silly number.
I wonder if there's potential here for something that the town, as town and parishes, we could consider between ourselves of a pooled by-election insurance scheme. each town and parish put in a certain amount of money a year into a pool, which can then be called upon if they're for by those places with a by-election towards the cost of that. You would like any insurance, you would lose most years, and just occasionally you would win. There might be scope for a scheme along those lines potentially.
I think the risk there is that everyone, it's kind of like everyone paying for one area again, isn't it? Because the likelihood is, from experience, that the marsh will be dipping into that fund all the time, but you'll have the likes of Postling that are paying into it and not seeing any return. So it's a bit of a difficult one. It's as if the district's paying for it. No, every parish is paying for it, but one parish is getting the money because they have the most contested. That's an agreement between parishes if everyone was, happy to do that. But I don't know with regards to electorate that they would welcome paying for someone else's parish council election.
Indeed, but what goes around comes around sometimes.
Yeah.
If you're then sat in Folkestone and going, I've been subsidising this for ages, it just takes one by-election in Folkestone, and that's a lot of money suddenly.
Oh, yeah.
Kirsten and then Mike, if I may. Still on mute, Kirsten.
Sorry. Sorry, I don't know the answer to this. I'm quite new to this. Paul, do all district councils charge for by-elections?
Primarily the most do. In Kent, I think it's every Kent authority that do, but some don't. Some boroughs, district, city councils, they will pay for them and not recharge parishes. It's entirely up to the local authority whether they want to do that, adopt whichever way they want to.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question really was just to clarify that it's only a Folkestone and Hythe decision that stipulates that the parishes have to pay for by-elections, which from what you said was passed in 2016. So there's no reason why Folkestone and Hythe at some stage in the future couldn't reverse that decision and underwrite by-elections. Is that true?
Yeah, that's quite correct. Yeah.
Thanks.
Could a distinction be made between paying the regular cost of elections and the cost of by-elections? So, for instance, you would leave the regular cost with town and parishes who could save for it, when they're coming, but by-elections, except that you would underwrite those.
Well, that would be a conversation, a question to be posed to council. Yeah.
I'm absolutely, trust me, with the finance brief at this stage, we can't change anything in year anyway. But I think it's a perfectly valid question to be asked, and it's a question, as you say, that would need to go to council. But it would be I'm interested in knowing the parameters of it. Would it have to be all elections, or could one just do it for by-elections?
Yeah, I think that's something to dig a bit deeper on. But ultimately, if it's a council decision to subsidise by-elections, but then the parishes are, recharged for their every 4 yearly cycle, then that would be outlined in the report and therefore voted on, adopted.
Okay, noted. I think that's got a lot of hands up. I'm going to go to Anthony first. I think that's spoken, and then.
Yes, thank you. Can you just confirm then that Folkestone and Hythe are the outlier here? Most other district councils pay for their by-elections. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. So the Kent scale of fees is primarily used for recharging parish councils. So there are quite a few other Kent authorities. I think the majority of recharge their parishes to for by-elections and for the 4-yearly cycle.
So for example, our neighbouring borough, Ashford, they pay for by-elections. Is that correct?
I would have to look into that, but from speaking to our Kent authorities at meetings, various meetings that we have, the majority do recharge, but for specifics, I would have to take that away.
What happens then, therefore? I mean, Burmarsh is a very small parish, 300 odd residents. If there was a by-election that needed to be called, we wouldn't have the money to run it. So what happens then? Yeah,
so that's with regards to Frank's question earlier on. I think what would have to, because legally we have to run it. So I think that I'm, just spitballing here. I'm not saying that this would happen in stone, but one would think the district council would have to foot the bill, and then there would be some sort of recharge over time to the parish council if it went the whole way. So there are, like I say, several steps to get to that point. You have to have the 10 electors come forward to call it, and you have, depending on how many vacancies there are, you have to have that many people to stand plus one to make it co-contested. If it's uncontested, there's no charge to the parish council if it's a by-election. So it's that whole, if it goes the whole way, then unfortunately the recharge is in place.
Okay, thank you.
Kirsten, then Frank.
I was just going to say, especially for our parishes that have very few residents, is there not a way that we could, or the district council could consider having like a scale, so those with a greater number of residents would receive less money towards their by-elections than those places where, like Burmarsh, there's only 300 people. Just an idea.
Yeah, so with that, it's you'll notice that the parish council precept will increase when the 4-yearly cycle comes around to obviously fund elections. So I think that would be the way to fund by-elections. The precept would cover that, but obviously there is a lot of the electorate and residents, their council tax would go higher to pay for that. So that's the risk there, and obviously I don't think anyone would want their council tax to go any higher.
It should also be said that the elections, your recharge, are essentially on the number of electors in an area anyway. So Burmarsh will pay less for an election because there's many fewer people than someone with a large ward would anyway. So there is a certain amount of reciprocity there anyway. Frank.
Fine. Yeah, we obviously these parishes. No, I don't think anybody objects to the fact that we have to pay for the 4-yearly circle of elections. We all budget for it because we know it's happening, and also the cost to us is normally lower because it's all usually held at the same time. Well, it is always held at the same time as district elections, and sometimes there's been a third one as well, which brings the cost down even more. It is the cost of by-elections and the fact that they can suddenly occur when you least expect them.
Yeah,
I understood that from what Anthony was saying, that I understood too from a now town councillor at New Romney who used to be in the Ashford district, that Ashford don't charge for by-elections, but they do charge for normal 4-year cycle.
So with the reason why it's inherently lower at the 4-year cycle is because most of the costs are halved, because the costs are shared. So poll cards, obviously, they're shared with us at the district council, majority of the print costs and things, but there are certain things that are costed to the parish because it's a parish alone that had them. So, for example, the postal packs, the ballot box, that sort of thing. Which is it's unfortunately the legalities around elections is a bit unuser friendly, shall we say, not of the times. So, you know, when it says it asks for 10 petitioners, I do think that is a bit low. But then if you look at a district council election, it only requires 2. And that's 2 across the whole of the district. So and that's county as well. So it's totally different. And believe it or not, it takes longer for a district to get called, from my experience. Obviously, it's the difference as well is that at Parish there's a time frame, so it's within those 14 days. And if we don't receive the required amount of people, so those 10 people that are registered, validly registered in the area, then it goes to co-option. So it's handed back to the parish to then co-opt someone. But there is no deadline for local. So the 2 electors can come whenever they want. So it's a bit unbalanced if you look at it that way. Bit strange, but it's the remit that we're working to, unfortunately.
I totally understand that you work within the law entirely on these things, so I fully take that point. I can say that we've heard the views of everyone here about the costs to parishes of by-elections. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that I'd like to be able to pay for next year. But there's a list of those things. But view heard, and we can take that on board, and it would certainly be useful potentially for the views of some more town and parishes as well as to whether that is a real concern. You know, if that's something that's one of the things that keeps them awake at night, that would be useful to hear more views from more people. Not got any more hands again at this moment. I had a couple more around voter ID, Paul. So you said the total number of refusals that you had were 35 and that 31 of those returned. So that says that only 4 people were put off. Does that include people who were met by greeters who didn't have that as well? Or were you, or did greeters, people who were turned away by greeters without voter ID, did they not make the list?
Good question. And again, working in the confines of legislation and the regulations, the ballot paper refusal list only had to be completed if the person reached where the ballot papers were issued. So in response to your question, if there was a greeter that turned away someone that asks, you know, have you got your ID ready? And they go, oh, I've forgotten it's in the car. That would not be added to the ballot paper refusal list because they're not at the point of issue. So in theory, you are not refusing a ballot paper. It's a bit of a loophole in the legislation. But if you look at it verbatim, the greeter at the door is not issuing the ballot paper, so there has not been a refusal to make. It's those at the desk.
Get that, but it skews the statistics, doesn't it? I mean, we don't know how many the greeters actually rejected. Then I'll go from your point of view anecdotally. What was the difference between the number of people that greeters bounced as opposed to those who actually refused at the desk?
That is an unknown because, again, by law, we weren't required to make any note of those that were turned away or memory jogged or prompted to say you need to bring your ID. It was something that we brought up time and time again with the powers that be to say that, you know, like you said, the figures are skewed. It's not a true representation of you know, what happened at the polling stations, but it was kind of listened to and moved on. So unfortunately, the ballot paper refusal list, like I say, was at the point of issue, and that was the only collation of data that we were required to do.
I understand that. I understand that you work within the law that you've got, which is exactly what you have to do. I find the law to be deeply disturbing on that one. It's that you've got somebody stood by the front door who essentially could have turned 1,000 people away, and we don't know about it. It feels like 35 out of 31, 31, but you know, 35 people were turned away and 31 of them came back. It feels excellent. 4 does not feel like a problem, but if it was 400 or 4,000 who were flipped by greeters, now I've got a problem.
Sure. Yeah, and it's echoed amongst the electoral community, the facilitators of as well, because we are going into a parliamentary somewhat blind, because like you say, it's great statistics that only 4 people didn't return, but of the polling stations that we had greeters, not every polling station had a greeter, by the way, only the busier stations, as a part of kind of a channel flow, and to make sure people had a bit of a streamlined process when getting in there. There was no bottlenecks, etc. So not every polling station did. I can't remember offhand how many, but I can get those statistics for you. Yeah, and so in theory, like you say, there could have been, I don't know, 30%, 20% of electors that had to be jogged, and then 1%, 2% of those didn't have it and were turned away. But we're not going to know that, unfortunately. For May, they may change legislation. They may reiterate some points that from this point on for parliamentaries, for future elections, that greeters aren't allowed, or greeters have the ballot paper refusal list, or it's supposed to include the people that are turned away at the door. But yeah, unfortunately, we like I say, work within the confines of what we're told to do.
Okay, I think we can. That's all of us taking the note that we can take those statistics with as much salt as we have to hand at any time. But okay, are there any other questions from any other member of the committee? I'm going to take as a basic shaking of the head. In that case, I think we can, unless you have anything else that you questions that you had for us, Paul, I think we'll draw that to a close.
No, just thanks for listening to me, really. Ramble on.
Thank you very much for coming and doing a very thorough, what do we call it, outline of how things went, and taking our questions and all that sort of thing.
No problem.
We'll have to work on somebody about the cost of by-elections.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely, and the answer is probably me, Frank. So at this moment, I'm expecting a series of emails, but we will. Yeah, I've heard the point, and from the point of view of Folkestone Town Council, Hythe Town Council, and Sandgate Parish Council, I've iterated those views a number of times as well. And finally, just to say, I noted from your statistics that the highest turnout in the elections was Harvey West Ward in Folkestone. So I think it's only fair to say, as the councillor for Harvey West Ward for Folkestone Town Councillor, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone else, for attending this meeting. And we'll draw it to a close there. Thank you very much for being here, and good night.